I am live. I'm back from a weekend away, and I'm reading The Laird and the Lady. We are in the second part of this book, and it's chapter 9, entitled The Sealed Room. This is a novel by Joan Marshall Grant. She passed away in 1989. This was published in 1949, and it is a romance, and Marylda is now at the castle of her new husband, Rowan. The Sealed Room. 3 days later, Marylda again experienced the abrupt transition between deep sleep and intent wakefulness. The rapid beat of her heart was insistent, as though she had been running, but running from what? She tried to reason with herself. Don't be silly, Marylda. You're perfectly safe. Open your eyes, and if the room is still dark, you can switch on the light. She could hear Rowan's regular breathing, feel his shoulder warm under her cheek. Why did she always expect to see the room which belonged to the dream that was so clear until it suddenly escaped when she was fully awake? If only she could remember the dream, she could cure herself of this irrational fear. Please, when I open my eyes, let it be daylight. She moved, and Rowan instinctively tightened his arm around her. Darling, he murmured, I forgot to tell you how much I love you, how much I love your right ear. Everything was again secure. The morning grey with rain beyond the open windows, her travelling clock affirming that Elsie would bring in the morning tea in half an hour, precisely at 8. Angela climbed out of her basket, stretched, brought Marylda a shoe, and waited expectantly to be invited to jump on the bed. Before going to turn on the bath, Rowan surveyed the sky. It's going to be wet all day, he said judiciously, which is a nuisance, for I promised Robbie to go round about the butts on the low ground. It's the best part of 10 miles, and it will be heavy going. Would you rather not come? What did he want her to say? Would it mean being left with Janet, or worse, going out to lunch with Georgina? What are the others doing? Georgina got her own plans, and I suppose Janet will insist on being hearty. Darling, I thought you liked hearty women. If I did, I should tweak you out of bed and throw you into a cold bath to harden you off. I prefer my wives glamorous and highly decorative. He came back to kiss her. Now we shall be late for breakfast, and you've so undermined my morale that I'm delighted. The second gong was no more than the distant voice of ineffective grown-ups. She decided to spend the morning doing flowers, an art in which Janet had given up trying to compete. The library was the only room which had not suffered from Victorian decoration, and she would use the 4 white Bristol urns which she had found neglected on a high shelf of one of the pantry cupboards. They would look well on each side of the twin fireplaces by Gringling Gibbons, and lighten the room, which in spite of 4 south windows was sombre, with the calf-bound books that lined the walls from oak wainscoting to moulding plaster ceiling. Anderson joined her while she was cutting flowers from the borders which flanked the wide path of the kitchen garden, whose walls enclosed some 8 acres. He even allowed her to take tendrils which had sprung up beside the roots of the vine, which were his special pride, for since discovering that she was not ignorant of his craft, and had a great enthusiasm for flowers, he had also become unusually genial. He carried the baskets to the house, and on the excuse of asking her opinion as to the varieties of carnations she would prefer, a courtesy, for he had already made up his mind, and had no intention of altering the list he had selected, stayed to watch her fill the urns with a satisfying arrangement of white flowers. They are very effective, he said sententiously. I would not have believed that anything could be nicer than sweet peas and asparagus fern, though some prefer gypsophilia, except carnations in silver vases. From Anderson this was high praise, and received with such warmth that in a glow of new allegiance he went to the kitchen to inform Mrs. MacTaggart that they had done well to listen to Robbie. So Mrs. MacTaggart provided poached eggs on spinach in addition to the remains of the Sunday joint, which Georgina had considered sufficient for Marylda's lunch. "What shall we do the afternoon?" said Marylda to Angela, who had shared this solitary meal. "We might tell Agnes to light a fire in the library and indulge in a good book, Boswell or Walter Scott. If this proves boring, there's always the one of the volumes of the Badminton magazine which we could improve our knowledge of sport." Angela gazed pensively at the sideboard until Marylda took the hint and gave her a third hunk of mutton. "However, we are not going to spend a cozy afternoon on the sofa, nor am I taking you for a walk. We are neither of us very brave, but at least we prefer to tackle something tangible than to lie awake imagining horrors which probably don't exist. Rowan refuses to tell me why the room above ours is taboo, and Duncan also avoids the subject. I have thought of a way to get in there and find out for myself, and we will not consider what happened to Mrs. Bluebeard when curiosity got the better of her." Angela barked, intending to show that she was prepared to share any reasonable adventure. Marylda decided she was trying to protest. "Darling, I'm not being unreasonable. Consider the plan of the house. The best rooms face south, for who in Scotland would neglect the smallest chance of sun? In the third story above the terrace there are excellent rooms, but they are all used to store what Georgina calls lumber, being unaware that most of it consists of extremely valuable antiques, which in due course I shall rescue. There is a valid excuse for not using the rooms that adjoin the east battlement walk, for Alice is said to be still in occupation, which I doubt, for I tried hard enough to feel anything odd in there. But what could have happened in the room at the other end of the corridor, which was sufficient to cause the evacuation of all others?" Angela barked again, delighted that her previous attempt at conversation had produced a response. "You want to know how we are going to get into that room? As you have probably noticed, through the south side of the house has 3 stories, the rest has only 2. From the outside you wouldn't know it, for there are battlements that allow a narrow walk between them, and the roof, which is, as you can see by looking up from the courtyard, slopes to a central ridge instead of being flat, like the south side. We will go to the battlement walk through the door in the east tower, and if we meet Alice, we will bow politely and hurry past her, or through her, if that wouldn't be discourteous. And when we reach the west tower, we shall probably find that the key from the east tower fits that lock, for I have already discovered that several of the bedrooms' keys are interchangeable. And when we reach the west tower, we shall probably find that the key from the east tower fits the lock, for I have already discovered that several of the bedroom keys are interchangeable, and if the lock of the tower door is sealed, like the one opening into the corridor, we will go to Inverness and buy some purple wax and borrow Rowan's seal, and risk anyone noticing until we've had time to produce a convincing forgery. I'm sorry to have to do it without telling Rowan, but I'm not going to go on having nightmares without trying to find out why." Angela recognized the underlying fear in her mistress's voice and whimpered in sympathy. "No, Angela, we are not in the least afraid, nor do we feel guilty. Rowan is trying to hide something from me because he thinks I should be frightened if I knew it. But he will tell me something or other, just as I shall have to tell him that I have also had to lie. But if I know the truth, I shall be able to make it easier for him. I shall know exactly what to say instead of hurting him because I haven't had time to be tactful. We are doing this for Rowan, not against him. If we remember that, we shan't try to run away. And as I've made up our mind, we shall go up there now, before we have a chance to change it. With Angela close at heel, she ran up the stairs of the East Tower and went briskly along the stone battlement walk. She was so confident that it must continue round 3 sides of the castle that for a moment she could not accept that on the north of the battlements were part of the main wall, that the narrow walk was a cul-de-sac. On her right was the mock Gothic roof of the American wing, and on her left the smooth leads of the castle roof sloping up to a ridge. Then I shall have to go along the flat roof above the terrace, she said. As the wall beside the tower is 10 feet high, I shall have to find something to stand on. Angela snuffled happily among the sheeted furniture in Alice's room, convinced that her mistress was cooperating in a mouse hunt, while Marylda dragged a chest out of the tower door. She went back to look for a stool to give the extra height she needed when she suddenly realized that her chosen route was impossible. It would be easy enough to let herself down at the far end, but how could she get back again? She dare not risk being marooned on the other battlement walk, and even if she could be sure of opening the door on the other turret, it was more likely that the sealed room would be empty. If she had a ladder, she might be able to drag it with her, but it would be far too dangerous to be seen carrying a ladder up there, even if she knew where to find one. But what about the lower roof? She crawled up it, her rubber-soled shoes finding precarious perches on the smooth surface, damp soaking through the knees of her slacks. She grasped the ridge and pulled herself up until she could look down to the courtyard. The roof sloped to a gutter. Beyond it, a parapet about 18 inches high was all that could protect anyone from a fall of over 30 feet. But if that someone had a good head for heights, crawled along the gutter, and then climbed over the opposite roof, she would reach the west battlement walk and the door to the sealed room. Her hands were slippery with sweat that was cold as the drifting rain. In a moment she must let herself slide down, but could she prevent herself going too fast? If she rolled, would the lodge in the gutter go, or go over the parapet? It seemed so much steeper now than she felt the drag of vertigo. She swung her legs across the ridge and let herself hang by her hands, involuntarily shutting her eyes as she began to slide. Please, God, don't let me go too fast. Her feet jarred against the parapet, and she fell sideways into the shelter of the gutter. Now it was easy. Now she had only to crawl along until she came to the opposite side of the courtyard. Don't look over the edge. Keep your head well down so that no one can look up and see you. It was difficult turning the corner, for the gutter was choked with leaves, black with decay, and she had to scrape them away before she could pass. With almost overwhelming relief she saw, close to the northwest corner, a series of iron rungs driven into the leads. Looking back, she saw there had been a second inconspicuous ladder on the east roof, which she had been too agitated to notice. They must have put them there to give access to the gutters when someone had to come here to clean them. Climbing the rungs was more difficult than she had hoped, for they were red with rust, and felt alarmingly brittle. How long had they been here? Would they take her weight? She counted them. 18. It would be easier coming down if she knew the exact number. It was luxury to let herself slide down into the shelter of the west battlement walk, that was green with moss, secure as turf between yew hedges. The key of the west tower, which she had hung around her neck, was cold between her breasts. It must fit the lock, it must. Her hand was trembling, and it was difficult to fit the key into the opening in the heavy oak. It wouldn't turn. Try again. It must be very stiff. She pressed on the key until the iron dug into her hands. Suddenly it gave, with a sharp sound like a dead branch cracking. But the door would not yield until she threw her full weight against it, bruising her shoulder. The hinges screamed as though in urgent protest. A dead bat lay in the dust on steps which she knew led down to a brick wall. Across the circular landing, the brass handle of the inner door gleamed in the pale light. The door had been painted. White flakes had fallen to the faded carpet, showing the grey oak beneath. Did she want to open it, or would it be so much wiser not to disturb this secret of Cloud? Losing your nerve? She was startled by the sound of her voice. You will feel pretty silly if you find that Rowan was telling the truth, that the floor is rotten and you've got nothing more to fear than the risk of falling through the ceiling of your own bedroom. Why didn't I remember to bring cigarettes with me? Oh, I don't know when this stopped, and this is too exciting to miss something. Did she want to open it, or would it be so much wiser not to disturb the secret of Cloud? Losing your nerve, she was startled by the sound of her own voice. You feel pretty silly if you find that Rowan was telling the truth, that the floor is rotten and you've nothing more to fear than the risk of falling through the ceiling of your own bedroom. Why didn't I remember to bring cigarettes with me? It's no use waiting here. Either go back and admit you're a coward or open the door. I finish this here.